So we're going to take a moment to look at this idea of communion, and a much spoken about subject in the church, perhaps in some churches a forgotten about subject, and certainly something that Jesus spoke about in his last hours with his boys, and spoke about how his blood would be shed for us and his body would be broken for us, and that would become what we call communion. But sometimes we miss out the importance of this thing. And I feel like what we're discussing and deciding on as a church is the regularity of when we share it, how we share it, and what this means for us. And the tag we've used and something that we're learning is that there's more to this meal. It's not just a ritual that we perform or something we do on a regular basis, but it's actually a relational aspect of the gospel. It's how we respond to Jesus on an ongoing basis for what he's already given to us. And so it's really an exciting subject. And so I just wanted to take a few minutes just to discuss a few aspects of it and hopefully equip you and encourage you and just put faith in your hearts for when you share communion, not just with us as a church, but wherever you may find this content helpful. And so be encouraged. The first thing is, if you look at the idea of communion, really it's an Old Testament picture that comes from the idea of the Passover that God then gives us in the person of Jesus when he leaves us with the Lord's Supper. And so if you look at the Passover in the Old Testament, it's when God was going to free his people from slavery in Egypt, and he was going to set them free. And we all know the story of Moses and the plagues and the Red Sea being parted and God's people moving forward in freedom. But what we miss sometimes is this thing called the Passover, which was God setting up the Exodus, God setting up the victory that his people would walk into. And how he did this was he would say to them, I want you to take a lamb, and I want you to slaughter the lamb and use its blood to mark your door frame. And so they would say, put one spot of blood above the door and left and right of this door frame. And that is obviously a picture for us of what Jesus would do on the cross. And he says that I'm going to pass through the town, and when I see the blood on the frame, I will literally pass over your house. That's where we get the name Passover from. And this meal has been shared for centuries, and for many people, they still, to this day, it's shared in Jewish culture. And many of them don't understand or believe that the Messiah has come. We no longer have to share the Passover meal, for we now have communion, a representative of the actual person of Jesus, which has done what the Passover was just a picture of. And so we often say this, the Passover was a picture or a shadow of the substance of Jesus, the person. Really a powerful reality. And so the blood was put on the door frames, and God said he would pass over those so that these people could be set free. It was a picture of forgiveness. But the thing that we don't often speak about is how he then said, I want you to take the lamb and I want you to take it into the house, roast it in the oven, and eat it with bitter herbs alongside unleavened bread. Unleavened bread was unblemished bread. It was a picture of Jesus' body as he would give his life up for us as an unblemished body, a sinless body, a perfect body, that Jesus would give himself up for us as the body of Christ, his bride. And so it says, take it into your house and I want you to roast this lamb, put it through fire and torture basically, and then share it and eat it. And I want you to use this as sustenance for your journey, because later on we read that when the people left Exodus, see, he passed over the houses. They never got judged. They never got killed. They got set free. And then they ate the lamb, which was sustenance for their journey. It was life-giving sustenance for the journey. It says none feeble among them would pass through the Red Sea. In other words, in 2.5 million people, no one would be sick or have any ailments. They would pass through free and whole. It's an amazing picture. And so two things we see in this picture of the Old Testament Exodus that is actually lived out through the meal, the miracle meal of communion, is that we are not only set free because of his blood, but we are made whole, and healing takes place because of his body. Let me say it like this. His body was broken so that ours would be made whole. And so I want to suggest that there's more to this meal. It's not just a reminder of the idea of Jesus. It's actually partaking in the promise and reality of what he won for us on the cross. And so his blood forgives us, but his body makes us whole, sets us free, heals us from the inside out. And I just want to encourage you with that. The other thing we've come to realize about this meal of communion is that it's an opportunity for us not to just eat a meal, but to enjoy a miracle. We often say that eating a meal is temporary, but enjoying a miracle has a forever reality to it. So when we share communion, we don't just remind ourselves that God's freed us and made us whole, but we also partake in this idea and this faithful reality that when we share communion, we believe that we've not just been set free and made whole for this season, but for the seasons to come. And so it actually says, as often as you drink this in 1 Corinthians 11, when Paul reminds us of the meal of communion, he says, as often as you drink this, you proclaim the Lord's death. And actually in proclaiming his death, what are we doing? Well, in Colossians it says he has triumphed over evil. He has won this victory for us. And so in proclaiming his death, we are actually establishing his victory. So what's happening? Every time we share the meal of communion, we're actually proclaiming that he has won for us victory forever, never again. And so it says, as often as you do this. And so we've come to realize that there's a miracle in this meal. And the more often we share this meal, the more of the miracle we enjoy. And so I want to just encourage you with that, church, and for anyone that's listening to us, there's more to this meal. Some of you grew up in traditional churches where you took communion every weekend. I was one of those, and I'm grateful for the consistency of it, but perhaps just lacked sometimes the clarity of why we did that. And so I want to encourage you, this is a miracle meal. You are literally taking on the promise of forgiveness when you share that juice or that wine as you do it. And you're enjoying the promise of wholeness and healing that God won for us through his son Jesus on the cross when his body was broken for us that we could be made whole. So be encouraged, share communion with faith. And when we approach it with faith, we take on the promise. And so be encouraged around this meal of communion.